I want to welcome to the stage Brad Smith, the President and Chief Legal Officer at Microsoft, at a time when I think a lot of us are looking for statesmanship, stateswomanship. I can say, actually, Brad has become quite a statesman from the business community. And a lot of people ask, well, where is the leadership coming from the business community? Brad's voice has been heard, and Microsoft's voice through his leadership has been heard on issues like immigration and freedom of expression and privacy. I've had the privilege of being in a range of meetings with Brad at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he's leading discussions with heads of government, NGO leaders, other business leaders, et cetera, able to traverse the frontiers, just like we talked about this morning. And so I think we'll have a great opportunity to hear his insights. I would also say, as someone who's trained as a lawyer and practiced law and decided to leave law practice, that for anyone who knows someone who's considering law school, Brad actually is a walking example of what someone can do, not only with legal education, but also coming at issues through the law. Not limited to that. I'm about to use that terrible lawyer's phrase, including but not limited to, through a legal framework. So he really represents the best, not only of what business can do, but also the best of the legal profession. And I'm delighted to welcome Brad to the stage. There he is. Yeah.
Good morning. Great to see you. Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure for me to join all of you here this morning, including but not limited to the fact that it's really nice out. And it's a great opportunity to sit indoors and not see the view at all. But it's my pleasure this morning to talk about the issues that I know all of you are spending this week talking about, and frankly, what you are spending your year and your careers advancing. Because the work that you're doing is so important. The work that BSR is doing is so important. And if there were ever a time when business needs to lead, it is now. I want to talk a little bit about what it means to think about responsibility in the digital age. And I think it has to start by recognizing, as you've been hearing this morning, about the incredible challenges of our time. Whether we're talking about technology or politics or culture or economics, this is a challenging time. And I think for all of us in business, it gives us the opportunity to focus on one question above all else: what are we going to do? What sense of responsibility are we going to bring to the table, not just to the conversations that need to take place, but to the actions that need to follow? Now, I think it's helpful to take a moment and think about the world, because in many ways, it's a great moment. In some ways, if you think about the internet, it is a golden age for free expression. In the history of humanity, it has never been easier for one person to sit down and write down what she or he thinks and share it with the world. And in many ways, as you just heard, artificial intelligence is creating a world of new opportunities: better healthcare, better agriculture, better tools to help us in our daily lives. More than ever, digital technology has become a cornerstone of our lives. But for every business, we also need to step back and ask, well, what about the rest of things? In other words, if you're in the tech sector, why isn't this just an era where everyone is euphoric about the future of technology? Well, the reality is that with every opportunity, there also come challenges. And as we think about the future of technology for our business, as you think about your business and what you're doing, there is a host of challenges. Inevitably, inherently, there is. Certainly in the tech sector, we have to ask ourselves, what does technology mean for traditional jobs, for privacy, for inequality, for people with disabilities? I think more than anything, we in our industry need to recognize that we need to move technology forward without leaving people behind. That will not happen by itself. It will not happen without a forethought. It will not happen unless tech companies take the lead and step up to their responsibility, but we also need to recognize for each and every issue, we live in a world of shared responsibility. Responsibility that is shared between companies and governments and NGOs and consumers who are also citizens. And what we need to think about, I think for each of us, for our companies where we work, is what is our approach? What are we going to do as a business? I thought I'd share with you a bit this morning what we at Microsoft are doing, really from the perspective of thinking that it's an example of what we all have the opportunity to think about in our businesses. As we've surveyed the world and thought about the time in which we live, we've focused this year on three things. And I'd like to talk a little bit about each of them. The first is what it really means to be trusted globally. We're a global company. So many of you work for global companies, and if you don't, I'll bet you work for a company that aspires to be a global company. And yet we need to be trusted everywhere, and not in just a few places. That really means that we need to protect people everywhere. At Microsoft, it has meant that we've needed to think not just about our technology, as important as that is, but about how we will use our voice as well. That's one of the reasons we've sued the United States government, our own government, 4 times. It's one of the reasons that this story appeared in the New York Times just yesterday. We saw the practices that this and other governments were pursuing that we thought put people's privacy at risk. And so we went to court to challenge it. It's why in the coming months, you'll read that one of the cases this year before the US Supreme Court is another one of our cases that is all about how far governments can reach, in this case across borders, to access other people's email, even without regard to their own laws and their own legal rights. But of course, this is just the beginning. Because as a tech company, we need to think not only about how we protect citizens and consumers who are using our services from the actions that we believe represent an overreach by the government, we need to think about ourselves as well. We are stewards of massive amounts of people's most precious information. We are stewards of that information. We are not owners of it. So every day we're asking ourselves, what is it that we need to do? And of course, if you follow the news, as I'm sure all of you do, the year 2017 has shown that if we care about the privacy of people, we better care about the security of people and their information as well. Because there is no privacy without security. And if the year has shown nothing else, it's shown that we in the tech sector have the first responsibility to protect people's privacy. But again, it's a shared responsibility, which is why people like me spend a lot of time getting out and talking to customers around the world to share with them what we're asking ourselves. What does security mean for Microsoft, but what does it mean for them? What does it mean for customers? But perhaps more than anything else, we're also out and talking about an even bigger question. What does all of this mean for the world? Because for better and for worse, we have not just a front row seat, we are on the front line of one of the big trends of our time. New trends in the creation of cyber weapons and the like. We unfortunately have entered a world of invisible weapons. And we've seen these weapons launched this year. In the WannaCry attack from North Korea, an attack that affected 200,000 computers in over 150 countries. As we watch what happens in the world and we map it, what we're seeing is that, in fact, cyberspace is the new battlefield. This is definitely a new terrain for business. We're not just creating products for people. We have found ourselves building the technology that is the plane of attack. And because that is happening, we have suddenly found ourselves as the first responders in a new era of warfare. An era that is attacking at times hospitals, but really attacking everybody else as well. And so what we're having to address is how we will respond. What it has meant is that we've had to go back to school and learn. And one of the things we've shared with the world is that the world has a lot that it can learn from the past and needs to apply to the future. In 1949, the governments of the world came together in Geneva, Switzerland. They saw what had happened to civilians during World War II, and they adopted what was called the Fourth Geneva Convention, a convention to protect civilians in times of war. And yet, when you look at what is happening around the world, when you look at attacks on hospitals or the electrical grid or hacking into private accounts of political candidates or businesses, what we are seeing is not governments protecting civilians in times of war. We are seeing governments attacking civilians in times of peace. This is not the better century that people imagined when we turned the calendar to the year 2000. And so what we've done as a company is not only focus on how we build technology to better protect people, but how we use our voice to call attention to this problem and advocate for a new Geneva Convention, a digital Geneva Convention that would require governments to respect the rights of civilians and protect them, especially in times of peace. And one of the most interesting aspects about this, I think in some ways with implications for all of us in business, is what it has led us to learn more about. Because if you understand what's happened over the centuries with protection of civilians in times of war, you come to appreciate that it all came not from a government, but from outside government. A group of people in Geneva, Switzerland, that created the International Committee of the Red Cross, that brought governments together, that prodded them to take action. And what we've recognized is that as the first responders of this new era, those of us who are in the business of technology need to think about it as more than a business. We need to think about it as a cause for protecting people. That's why we've called for the technology sector to come together and adopt a tech accord that would pledge all of us to a simple principle, that we are committed to 100% defense, 0% offense. We will protect everyone, everywhere. We will never help a government attack anyone, anywhere. In an era of nationalism and protectionism and inward thinking, it is our necessity to persuade the governments of the world that everyone will be better off if our business and our industry can operate, if you will, as a new digital and neutral Switzerland. That is part of what it takes to sustain the world's trust. But of course, there's another challenge that I think we all face, regardless of the business we're in. And that's what it takes to sustain the world's trust when the survival, when the sustainability, when the health of the planet is literally at stake. We've had to look at ourselves. We've had to recognize that we need to get our house in order. We've acknowledged privately and publicly that the large technology companies of the world, including Microsoft, now consume more electricity than a small state in the United States. Our data centers consume more electricity than the state of North Dakota. And in a decade or beyond, the major technology companies will each consume more electricity than a mid-sized or small country in Europe. So we've focused on the commitments that we need to pursue. We've pledged to increase the green energy that is flowing into our data centers. We've pledged that that will pass the 50% mark this coming year, and then it will continue to get better from there. We pledge that we will maintain carbon neutrality as we have for several years, but we won't enter the market and sell the RECs that we get. We pledged and we are acting to invest in new energy technology like fuel cells and biogas and fuel batteries. And we pledged to use our voice to stand up for the kinds of policies around the world that we believe the world needs and deserves to protect the planet. That's why we were one of the first companies to be so vocal in calling on the United States to live up to the obligations that it took on just a year ago. But more than that, we also see the bright side. Because as you heard earlier, technology is not only a user of energy, it can help the world advance. And that's why we've launched our AI for Earth program that is working with customers around the world, companies, governments, and nonprofits to improve the management of water, to contribute not just to climate writ large, but to better agricultural practices, to precision farming, to new techniques that both improve yields and reduce the impact on the environment. It's why we believe that artificial intelligence can help sustain the biodiversity of the planet. All of these things are things we need to be doing everywhere. But there's a second aspect that has become so important, certainly for us and for everybody else over the past year. At the same time that we're thinking about the world, we better be thinking about every community at a very local level as well. That, I think, is one of the lessons of the 2016 presidential election in the United States and many other elections around the country and around the world. Now, at some level, we find in community after community, people are asking similar questions. They're asking themselves, how's technology going to transform today's jobs? It will. And they're asking themselves less optimistic questions. They want to know, as technology advances, what jobs are going to disappear. We look at these photographs, and it's worth looking at that one in the upper right. Did you know that there was a day just several decades ago when every elevator had a job inside it? There was somebody who pushed those buttons. Will there be a day 3 or 4 decades from now where people will come and look at that photograph in the lower left and say, you mean there was a day when every taxi had a job inside it? How quaint. That is the future to which we may be heading. But what we also know from our understanding of history is that there will be new jobs as well. What is hard at the moment is it's less clear where the new jobs will come from. There are new jobs that artificial intelligence will create, that technology will continue to create, that the needs of the planet will continue to create. The real question is, what are the new skills that people are going to need? One of the things that we've done over the past year is embark on a new program here in the United States. We've recognized that we were doing more, frankly, in rural Africa and rural Asia than we were doing in rural America, and that was our mistake that we needed to fix. That's why we've launched a new program, a program called Microsoft TechSpark, that we launched nationally from Fargo just a few weeks ago, that is all about investing deeply in 6 communities outside major metropolitan areas in 6 states, so we can bring together a combination of programs that are run by Microsoft Philanthropies, by the Technology and Corporate Responsibility Group, by other parts of our business, so we can really learn better what challenges communities in rural areas are facing and what technology might contribute in terms of solutions. Certainly one of the big things we know, one of the things we've had the opportunity to learn, is that we need to get digital skills and coding into more schools in this country and around the world. There are 37,000 high schools in America, and as of a year ago, the number that offered the AP class in computer science was only 4,310. It's only 12% of the nation's schools. How do we prepare the next generation for the future if we're not giving them the education they need? That's why we have our own program called Technology Education and Literacy in Schools, or TEALS, that this week, is in 348 high schools across the country. But more than that, we've coupled our philanthropic work with our voice. We were the company that was given the opportunity to stand up with the White House just a year and a half ago, when President Obama called for a bold step to get computer science into the nation's schools. And if you think about all the issues of the last year and how so few policies of the last administration have been sustained in the next, it's why we're encouraged when we see that the Trump administration has pursued this same path. Just a few weeks ago, President Trump signed a new order that will provide $1 billion of federal funding over the next 5 years to help get STEM and computer science into our schools. And it's why we have said, you know what, we stood up with President Trump and with President Obama. And I went to a school in Virginia with Ivanka Trump, who was the leader who really put this together, because this is a cause that transcends partisan lines, and thank goodness it does. It needs to do so. And so even though we may disagree on certain issues, we absolutely will work together on others. As we've learned more about these issues of digital skills, of employability, there's one other thing here in the United States that has really hit home. It's true here, it's actually true around the world, but the fact of the matter is, Broadband has become a necessity of life. Broadband is the future of medicine, of jobs, of education, of farming. If you don't have access to broadband, you don't actually have access to the year 2017. You are living a decade or two behind the rest of society. And yet here in the United States, the country that has given birth to so much digital technology, there are still 23.4 million Americans who live in rural areas that don't have broadband coverage at all. That's why we've called for a clear goal, a goal of closing or eliminating this gap over the next 5 years. It's why we put data to work and surveyed the country and identified the places where we believe new investments, both public and private, can close this gap. It's an area where we've had the opportunity to learn so much from other people, to be inspired by other people, as you see in this short video.
Just because you live in a rural area doesn't mean you shouldn't have the opportunity to be connected.
That was about, I'd say, 9th grade year is when I began taking college classes through dual enrollment. And that requires that you upload papers and assignments to the college as well as to the high school. The internet was terrible at home, so I would have to do my assignments really early, like a whole month early.
He had to submit a lot of his paperwork. It's just gonna sit there and just spin and spin and spin.
You know that the deadline's coming, and you know you need more research, and you know it's not enough. It's a struggle.
In the beginning of the semester, one of the questions I asked the students, just a show of hands, who has internet access? And typically, just a few. Right there, that tells me that I have to be a little limited in any kind of homework assignment I give. It's a handicap for teachers in the 21st century. I mean, here we are, hands are kind of tied.
The homework gap is a major problem for our region. And the exciting part is that Charlotte and Halifax County, our two pilot areas, are no longer going to be left behind in this digital divide. TV white space is a new technology that the FCC has allowed vendors to transmit broadband connections wirelessly over previously unused airwaves. Rural markets specifically, it is critical to have access to that lower band spectrum that allows internet providers to serve that last mile affordably. The goal is by fall to have about 250 connected, and we're hoping to have 1,000 families connected soon after that.
It's going to open the doors to economic development and allow the people in our area to have access to a world-class education.
It was a dramatic increase in productiveness and efficiency.
Dylan has a small antenna at his home, which is connected to a TV white space device, turns on his laptop, connects via Wi-Fi.
I don't know the tech side. All I know is it works.
Now that I have TV white space internet, I can use the cloud, and my grade actually shot up going forward with TV white space. I got high B's and A's.
This is where I grew up and I love it. I'm a country girl. Just train our kids so they can stay home and have that knowledge, and then they can bring it back here so that our community can grow.
TV white space held up very well with my college application. Once I graduate, I'll be going to attend Old Dominion University in the fall, studying computer science. And I'm very excited to go.
I think that is a great example of the exciting future that those of us who work in the business community have the opportunity to help people pursue. It's what we do every day. And when we can pull these ideas together and build new business initiatives, we can do it even better. That's why we've launched a new initiative, our Airband initiative, that will invest with telephone companies in rural areas with a commitment that we will bring broadband connectivity to 2 million new Americans over the next 5 years. But if you think about what we're trying to do, we're trying at the one hand to be globally trusted and at the same time locally constructive, relevant, helpful, connected. If we do all that well, frankly, it gives us the ability to do the third thing that matters so much, certainly to us and I think to so many people here and to businesses, to be able to stand up for the values in which we believe, even though sometimes these are days of controversy. That's why the third thing that we're so focused on is ensuring that we can live in a world and in a country and in communities that has respect for people everywhere, that honors diversity and inclusion. In our business, because of our global nature, we appreciate that diversity is simply an imperative. We can't serve the customers of the world unless we connect with the diversity of the world, unless we can bring that diversity of the world together underneath our own roof. In the Seattle area, we have employees from 157 countries. I've often thought that I get to work every day at the United Nations of Software. That's why it was an easy decision earlier this year when the travel ban was imposed to not only use our voice, but to step forward and disagree vocally and advocate for change. It's why when DACA was put on the potential chopping block, we stepped up in just a few hours and said that we would make this our top legislative priority in Congress. We'd even put it ahead of tax reform. And if the government wanted to deport any of the 44 Dreamers that are our employees, they would have to go through us. What that meant is that we'll ensure that our employees get legal representation, we'll pay for it. What it meant is that we'll go to court in our own name, either as an amicus participant or by intervening if we can, but we want our employees to know that if their future is at stake, we not only have their back, we will stand by their side. And it's why we're so enthused about the other issues that frankly connect to diversity and inclusion. You can see outside this room the kinds of work we're doing to promote more technology, better technology for people with disabilities. It's why we're bringing that into the company with hiring initiatives to bring more diverse people inside our walls. It's why we felt comfortable finding our way on what admittedly has been a journey over the past decade to recognize that it's not enough for us to ensure respect for people at work. We need to ensure that diverse people can find that same respect when they leave work and go home in the evening. It's why we've been comfortable standing up and using our voice and going to court on issues around the LGBTQ community and transgender rights. It's why we increasingly stood up, first in our home state, to address the vital issues of our country around race and criminal justice. It's why we're investing in technology that we believe can help police be a better part of the community, better trained to deal with difficult situations, to help people who have been incarcerated find better pathways out of the criminal justice system. And it's why we've taken on human rights as a global issue as well. It's an issue that sometimes challenges our business, as our technology can be put to work to censor information or to pursue people, but it can also be used to protect people and to advance causes like free expression. It's something that especially hits home as I have the opportunity each year to travel the world. I was so struck earlier this year when I was in Poland. I visited Warsaw, I talked to our employees, and interestingly, the very top question on their minds was not about how our business was doing, what the next product release was going to bring, where was the AI strategy going. It was about what was happening in Poland, about the new threats to the independence of the courts and the role of the judiciary. And as I walked down the streets of Warsaw, I was reminded that it's an amazing place. Here is a city, there are streets, you see buildings that as much as any other part of the world reflected the horrors of the last century. And it caused me to reflect on the fact that as the clouds grew in the 1930s, as the threats to people expanded, in so many ways, the businesses of that era and the business leaders within them did absolutely nothing. And I think that is a powerful reminder for us and for our own time, because it certainly leaves people like me saying more than anything else, that will not be us. We have a role to play. It's what has helped inspire us, for example, to pursue a new 5-year partnership with the United Nations to promote and protect human rights around the world. But the ultimate question, the fundamental question for all of us, for every business, is what is our North Star? I think it means we should not and cannot be silent. I think it means that we should be principled. Just because politics is all about personality doesn't mean that we need to make things personal. We can stick to a more even keel. Certainly as a company, as a business, as business leaders, we've strived in even the difficult year that 2017 has become to be clear to governments all around the world. We will partner whenever we can, but we will stand apart when we should. We will never make it personal, but we will be principled. We know what our North Star is. And I think for all of us in business, if we can remember where we are heading, then we can do what it takes, as you're hearing here, to ensure that this time, for good and bad and challenging, is nonetheless a time when business is leading the way. Thank you very much.
Very inspiring. Brad, thank you very, very much. I'm going to ask Brad a question or two and want to invite all of you as well. You can use the conference app to ask questions, so think what you may want to ask after hearing a remarkably energetic and insightful presentation. So thank you very, very much for that. We've been talking about business voice from last night, so what you said has hit home very, very directly. So Microsoft is a shining example of how companies are using their voice. Presumably, you don't just get up in the morning, this is not intended as a joke, and start putting ideas out on Twitter and so on, that you have a process that you go through because you have to figure out multiple trade-offs. So tell us a little bit about that process. How do you decide when it's time to weigh in and how?
Well, I think that's such a great question because I think it's one of the really important questions for all of us in business, because we may have a platform, but it's frankly not a platform that I think we can just say, oh, it gives us the opportunity to talk about whatever we want. I think in the first instance, it's important that the issues we address are connected to our business. I think that's then appropriate to, in effect, use shareholder resources to advance them, and it gives us credibility. And then I think about two things. First is, are these issues where if we don't do a good job, we're actually making the world worse? If we're not protecting privacy or security, if we're not managing our energy needs properly, if we're building a new version of Windows that makes it harder for people who are visually impaired to do their jobs, we risk making the world worse. And so we always need to, first and foremost, in my view, keep or get our own house in order. And do that with a real sense of humility. Recognize that as smart as we may think we are, on Monday, by Friday, we may be aware of new problems that we hadn't known about, or at least not understood or appreciated. So stay laser focused on that. And then second, I think we have the opportunity to think about opportunities to contribute to making the world better. If we can do it in part through our products, I think then that is a natural place for us to go. And then for us, it's often a question of connecting our products with our philanthropy and with our corporate voice. And I feel that when we can combine these three things, that's when we can truly be impactful. And it sort of argues for prioritizing those areas and then using our voice to add to other people's voices in other areas, but perhaps not making it quite so much a signature issue.
Great, and I should have added also, we'll be able to take questions live and in person as well. We've got a couple of people with
This is good. I mean, I'm sure the app is great, but it's still good to have people use their voice.
We believe in the blend of the real and virtual world, absolutely. Who's got, can you see where the mics are? There's one right here, one over there. So I'm gonna ask Brad one more question, then see if you've got any. We don't live in a world, I don't think anyone wants a world where business substitutes for government,
right,
but business has a role to play. So two-part question, basically. How do you work to bring government in? And we see and believe that government is not always keeping pace with technological change. How do you look to help governments make decisions on the basis of understanding where the technology is going and what the social implications are?
I think both of those are great points. And the first thing I would say is my own view, and I think Microsoft's view, is that almost every substantial human problem actually needs a combination of people coming together. It needs government. Frankly, we do our best work societally many times when government leads. It's just that in certain areas, government's not at the moment. But fundamentally, we need the public sector, business, the private sector, and civil society, the NGO community, academic community. We need to bring everybody together. That's the only way we're really going to make sustained progress. In terms of how we do that, I do think there's something to be said, and your question really alludes to it, to establishing a more common baseline of understanding, to try to take things out of the realm of opinion and put them into the world of knowledge or perceived and appreciated and understood facts. And that is where I do think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to help provide information about where technology is going, about how our products work. For years, I've heard people in the tech sector say, well, these folks in government, they just don't understand technology well enough, they're not keeping up. I think that's our problem, not theirs. I mean, we're the ones who are creating this stuff. We're creating it so quickly. How the heck do we expect people to keep up if we don't make it easier and take the information to them? So that's something that we're constantly doing. And what we've found over the years is, in my view, governments are way more sophisticated technologically than they were a decade ago. It varies from place to place. But everywhere you go, people work in government. They're smart. Most of the time, they're very dedicated. They care about the public. We just need to get them more data, and they may agree with us or not, but they're going to be better informed.
Do we have any questions? I think one over here. And if you can try to keep it concise and please introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciated your plain language, your direct address of this particular audience. And I'm wondering how you have the discussion about communicating these sustainability priorities to your investors, and in particular in the 10K, how does your internal controls team discuss that, and any questions about following a SASB framework? Thank you.
Let me just offer a couple of quick thoughts. I mean, first of all, I am strongly of the belief that we have to be good communicators about everything we do, and we do have to use plain language and be direct in addressing the issues. If we're not, then all is lost. Second, it means going out and having very direct conversations with people. So we have a team that gets out every year, a small team, but a terrific group that gets out and meets with investors. And some of this we do year-round, especially with the investors that have told us that they care deeply about issues like sustainability. But frankly, with the investors writ large, especially in the run-up to our annual shareholder meeting. We get out, we meet, we send people out. The chairman of our board goes out on these trips and meets with the large institutional investors, and oftentimes they're people who care about these and other CSR issues. Frankly, what we're finding is that in the investment community, the appreciation for the importance of CSR has skyrocketed. Because I think what investors have found is that the investments they hold can sort of go off a cliff if it's in a company that looks like it's on a sound growth path, but is paying no attention to these issues. So what we've found is that the connection between CSR and shareholder groups is, I think, much tighter than it has ever been before. I have to admit, I have not reread our latest 10K recently enough to hit the nail on the head for the more specific questions that you're asking. But we do go through this, in the 10K and in the quarterly 10Qs. We address the sustainability issues. When we talk about risk factors, we talk about also the various steps that we're taking. And we do really focus on ensuring that we have objectives that are measurable, and because that is the ultimate foundation for our internal controls.
Great, and we've got a question right here as well.
Sure. Thank you again for your remarks. My name is Jim Boyle. I lead a small company called Sustainability Roundtable Inc. And I'm interested, Brad, in your perspective as counsel at Microsoft in regard to the most sophisticated corporate social responsibility companies helping to address the role of the corporation in society, and specifically examining the call to responsibility not as an elected item, but as a function of the fiduciary duty of the directors. And I think this becomes particularly interesting as we move into what might be called a time of official denial, for instance, of climate science. And I'm just wondering, how does a company like Microsoft help lead on this sort of fundamental question about our civil society, about the legal role of top global corporations as things change?
Well, it's a great question. I'd say a couple of things. First, we've had tremendous support from our board of directors. We have a regulatory and public policy committee for the board. They've focused on a number of these issues, and then the audit committee is engaged as well. And it does go back to this strong conviction among our board that if we are not responsible in a broader societal sense, that fundamentally we put the shareholders' own economic stakes at risk. When we think about the question that you just asked, I think, frankly, it's helpful that we are as global as we are. It's like, yes, there are 3 countries on the world that don't like the Paris Accord, but there's like 170 countries in the world that are members of the United Nations. So we have to think about the world. And I think from that perspective, most of the world has a high expectation of what we do. I will say the one thing that we then try to combine is a commitment to stand up where we should. I showed you the slide about what we said, what I said immediately in the wake of the White House decision on the Paris Accord. But then mostly we're trying to sort of pivot a bit and actually talk about what you described, what we see as our role and our contribution, and not just slug it out in the world of politics on this issue every day.
There's a couple of questions that have come up on the screen. I'll take these, and then maybe, if time permitting, we'll go to one more. We've got the same question twice, but I want to take the question that I used to see, which was, how did leadership in the way you're describing it emerge at Microsoft? And then the other question is, what would you say to people who work in sustainability in companies where they don't have an executive champion along the lines of the role that you're playing?
In some ways, I would almost say that there's some common themes to think about with respect to both questions. You don't find courage in a day. These things are all about a journey. And certainly for me, as somebody who's been in a leadership role at Microsoft for a long time, I can stand up today and I can say the things that you heard me say, and our board, our CEO, our senior leadership team, they've all heard me say this. Our employees have heard me say this. And so it's actually easy to have courage when you have so many people who have your back. But we didn't get to the point of being willing to take on the kinds of positions in a day. It's been a journey over a decade, and the thing that is always striking to me is every journey is a bit of a step-by-step. It's good to have some sense of where you want to go. I always try to have some conviction about what lies 4 or 5 steps ahead. But when I think about our journey over 10 or 15 years, it's brought us to destinations we didn't imagine. I think that the issues that we had to address in the 2000s, especially around the needs of the LGBT community, and then what became marriage equality. That was a real journey. Because we went from, frankly, thinking, oh, these don't touch our business as directly, to being willing to be the corporate leader in Washington State in the 2012 election where marriage equality was on the ballot and say, this is a business issue. I was on television with television commercials. And so I'm a big believer in taking things a step at a time and then bringing people with you and asking what you can learn, being smart. I do think that if you don't have an executive champion, you obviously recognize that your work would be a lot better if you did. And so the real question is, well, how do you get one? And there's a couple of ideas that I would share. One is, look, one of the reasons I'm comfortable using my voice oftentimes in the way I do is so that people at other companies can say, hey, look, these folks at Microsoft have been leading the charge. And you know what? There's only one company in the world that was among the 10 most valuable companies in the world measured by market cap in 1997 and 2007 and 2017, and it's that company. So I guess you can take on some of these issues and actually be successful as a business. I try to actually be a bit of an example personally so that other chief legal officers or CFOs or others can say, oh, yeah, there are people who do this. And then the other thing I would encourage you to do is, I think you all know who are the investors that care about these issues. Encourage processes so that your CFO, a member of your board, your CEO, has some encounters with those people. Because as they get that feedback, they're going to start to see this increasing connection between, frankly, shareholder support and return and CSR.
Unfortunately, we are going to have to draw this to a close. I know we could go off in a number of directions. What you talked about, what you showed us, is remarkably diverse and very, very rich. Thank you for that, Microsoft. You and your team have been great partners to us at BSR, so thank you very much for that. And I want to thank all of you. We will go to a break. Then we have breakout sessions from 11 to 12. Lunches outside. It's, I think, 12 degrees cooler today than it was yesterday. So, but eat fast. If anything, it might melt, is the best I can say. Brad, thank you so much for inspiring us today.
Thank you for everything you're doing. Thanks.